have one question for absolutely everybody here right now. And just with your elbow buddy beside you, discuss this question. What do you think we are most afraid of? Go. All right, bring your eyes and ears back on me for a second. So I heard something out there, zombie apocalypse. Yeah, that is definitely scary. Somebody here is scared of the dark. That is okay. But many of you, I heard, scared of the unknown or fear of failure. The thing we are actually most afraid of is being embarrassed. Think about it for a second. Fear of failure or fear of the unknown. Is that really what we are afraid of, or is it that feeling of being embarrassed? Something that I've really realized is fear, something that really motivates us. It motivates us to do crazy things because we're so afraid of that feeling of being embarrassed. I mean, we will cheat, like some people procrastinate because that's easier than that sensation of absolutely feeling embarrassed. And what's challenging with that is it really starts clawing at our self-esteem. I'm somebody that grew up with pretty low self-esteem. And I had an idea one day saying, you know what, I don't like that. How can I look back at my life now that I'm older and I have some success? How can I look back and what can I learn from some of the trials and tribulations I went through? And here was the big idea that I discovered. There's something called self-efficacy. And the end result of self-efficacy is resilience. If you're resilient, right, you don't have to be embarrassed anymore because you can steer clear of the things, the fear that's going to put you down or make you upset. The two skills that you need in order to increase your self-efficacy are these. You need to learn how to advocate for yourself, and you need to learn how to be more self-efficient. Once you've done these things, self-efficacy increases, and you will become resilient people. I want to share for you just a little bit of how that happened for me. School was not a great place for me. In fact, I definitely was not that straight-A student. I was a student that barely made it by. And one of the biggest challenges that I had growing up was the fact that I have a learning disability, an ADHD. I am definitely not this type of worker. I'm like the latter type of worker. Attention is really challenging for me. So for me, these two things, they created something known as learned helplessness inside of me. I had no learning independence growing up. I always had to have people help me, and that's embarrassing. I'll give you an example. I remember in like grade 4 when my teachers would say to me, all right, class, time to write, and everybody would pull out their journal, right? Say, you have 15 minutes to write. I would sit there, and I would just stare at my teacher. I would play a game of academic chicken with them. I would stare at that teacher as they walked around. And after like 5 minutes, the teacher would say, DJ, have you started writing? And I'd be like, oh, miss, I'm just getting the good ideas out. You know, I'm almost there. And then I'd just stare at them as they walked around. And then like 5 more minutes would go by, and the teacher would look at me again. DJ, have you started writing? I'm like, oh, just getting to my blank page, miss. You know, I'm already there. And then like another 5 minutes would go by, and the teacher would look at me one more time and like, DJ, are you writing? I'm like sharpening my pencil. I'm like, oh, not quite, miss. And in that moment, teacher would say to me, give me your pencil. Let me write down your ideas. And boom, I have won the game of academic chicken. So you have to understand, for me, writing is really challenging. So is reading. In fact, I kind of read as though I'm in like grade 6. So for me, it was super embarrassing trying to write something and have people look at it. So it was easier for me to just sit there and get somebody to do it for me. But the problem was, I didn't feel good about myself. Who actually wants people to do everything for you? This was the big shift. What I learned in grade 9 was how to advocate for myself. And then in grade 12, I learned self-efficiencies. I learned how I learn. And when those two things happened, everything changed. I want to share with you exactly how that happened for me. So grade 9, I remember going to school, and I had this one thought in my head. I need to make a good first impression, man. Like, if people like me on the first day of school, high school will be awesome. So I start walking to school with this, like, ridiculous swagger going on, you know, thinking I'm like all that. I was basically wanting to be like Channing Tatum from like 21 Jump Street, you know? It was like my life goal in that moment to make a good first impression. But again, you have to realize in grade 9, I'm probably reading as though I'm in like grade 4. I mean, the biggest thing I was afraid of, my biggest fear, the thing that most embarrassed me is reading out loud. So you have to know, when I walked through the front foyer of my school and I was given my schedule, it was like a freight train hit me, because guess what the first class of grade 9 happened to be for me? English! I'm like, dum, 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 no, you know? Like, all I have to do is make a good first impression, and now I'm going to like the one subject I'm most likely to read out loud in, right? So me being me, I like beeline it to English, go to the very back of the class, sit away from everybody, and like melt into the seat, hoping I can just get through the next, hour and 15 minutes. And I'll never forget my grade 9 teacher. She was so happy all the time. Now picture this person, they like eat rainbows and happiness for breakfast. Like, that is how happy they are. So she doesn't just come into class, she like floats on in, and honest to goodness, what she does, she comes in and she goes, "Class, welcome to grade 9 English!" And she starts cheering and like giving us high fives. And I'm like, oh my goodness, who is this crazy English-loving person? And then I got super nervous because I looked next to me and I saw a stack of the book Romeo and Juliet. And my teacher starts talking about Shakespeare. And then she says, how else can we even do Romeo and Juliet justice than to read it out loud together? Together, out loud. I froze. In fact, I remembered when I was 4 years old, I learned this skill. I'll teach it to you. It's the skill of being invisible. It's easy. Whenever you're really nervous, close your eyes. I can't see you. You probably can't see me. Invisible, right? So instantly I pull the book up, put it in front of my face. I'm like, ha, I'm safe. I was not safe, because a second later, I remembered the feeling of that teacher putting her hand on my shoulder going, "You, why don't you read the part of Romeo?" I'm like, oh my goodness. In fact, I scanned a page of this to show you how ridiculous this was. Like, for the average grade 9 student, I think that's insane. But for me, that's an impossibility, man. So I'm standing there trying to figure out my first line, like heart's pounding, like palms are sweaty. Line after line is being read. And then it's my turn. And my mouth opens, and nothing comes out. I'm just standing there. Psychologist calls this high points of tension. And whenever you have these really, really high points of tension, one of two things happen. You either fight your way out of it or you run. So this is what happened to me. Fight or flight took over. I'm not proud of what happened, but this is how it went down. This was my fight. I looked at that poor teacher, and I had this book in my hand, and I heaved it at her. That was my fight. And this was my flight. I ran, man. I ran as fast as I possibly could in that classroom. And I'm like running, and I'm running, and I look at the back of the class, and I started recognizing there are like no doors anywhere. There's only windows. And thank God I was on the first floor of my school, because there was one open window. And I thought to myself, if I get a little bit more speed, I bet I could Superman myself out through that window. So that became my plan. I ran and I jumped out of the window, because that was less embarrassing than standing in front of that group of grade 9s, having my grade 9 English teacher sound out the words of Romeo and Juliet with me. My train wreck is not quite over. In fact, I Googled my school. This is where I went to high school. Right here was my grade 9 classroom. So, are you seeing what's happening? When I jumped out of the window, I promise you there are no unlocked doors in that quad on the first day of school. I had to pull myself back in the window. The weirdest thing though, man, everybody was like cheering for me, giving me high fives. Met my principal that morning. He's a good guy. Something really changed though. My teacher took interest in me. And she found me after school one day, and she said to me, "Why are you so afraid?" And I had all of this emotion kind of boil up in me in front of her. And like tears started to well. And I looked at her and I said, you know what I'm so afraid of? I'm afraid that I'm stupid. And I come to school and everybody's learning and they know stuff and they're doing stuff. And all I'm thinking about is, how can I get through that day? And what is more embarrassing than being stupid? And this is what I honestly felt. And this teacher, her being her, all, happy, looks at me, crying, and she says, DJ, that is fantastic information. Thank you for sharing. I'm like, just hug me. Like, I am not okay. But what I came to realize is when I did that, I advocated for myself for the first time ever. And she said, that is good to know that reading is so hard. Let's figure out how we can get you the reading up front, right? So you can rehearse and practice so that when it's time to read out loud in class, you don't go running for the window again. By advocating for myself, I learned the first step of becoming a resilient person. And it's something that I've learned to do is be able to see an embarrassment coming at me, see fear coming at me, and then telling people the things I need around in order for me to turn that failure into a success. The other thing that I learned is self-efficacy. And the way that I really learned it was to learn how I learn. And it happened in the most bizarre way. I remember in grade 12 being asked that great big question, what are you going to do with your life? And I think my answer was like, my life? What am I doing for lunch, man? It's a big question. So that got me a trip to the guidance counselor, and the guidance counselor asked me what I like to do. I really like first-person shooter games. So he slams his hands on his desk. He's like, perfect! You should join the army. And I'm like, you're right! I'm wicked at first-person shooter games in the basement of my mom's house on the couch. I should join the army. So I do that. I, march myself to the local recruitment office and I enlist into the military. And I start training to become a soldier. This is when I learned how I learned. And it's fascinating. The military brought me a lot of success. And it's hard to describe. Soldiering just came easy to me. And when I left, I started understanding the way that they taught me was amazing. They taught me in 4 very different ways: in a visual way, in a sequential way, in an auditory oral way, and in a kinesthetic way. And by teaching in all of these different ways, all different types of learners can learn. I'll give you an example. We were taught how to shave our face. There's a military way to do everything. So imagine this one day, drill sergeant walks into the parade square with a massive wash basin and puts it down. Calls us to attention, attention, and we all snap to attention and stare at him. And then he starts shaving his face in front of 60 of us. That was for all the visual learners to watch that technique. The military are brilliant at delivering instruction in a booming audio format. So all the people that are great at listening and learning, totally taken care of. We were then marched down to a tent line with a classroom set up, and we were issued Canadian Forces field manuals on how to shave your face. There is 14 steps to a properly shaven military face. So people that learn best sequentially in order, like reading, totally taken care of. And last but not least, kinesthetically, oh my goodness, we were shaving our face 3 times a day during basic training. This is what I learned about myself. I learn differently from people. Everybody learns a little bit different. But I have what are called peaks and valleys. I'm incredibly good visual. Sequential, not so much. Auditory and orally, pretty good. And kinesthetic, it's like my superpower. I'm really, really good at that. But what I then realized was a lot of schooling happened in that sequential area. It's not that I'm stupid, I just don't learn well the way school teaches. And I started learning how to be efficient. How do I take these things that I'm really good at to overcome this challenge? And I learned to outsource things. So remember I was mentioning I'm not great at reading? If I open a book and I start reading, I'm only going to comprehend 15% of that page. This is why I have to reread things 3, 4, 5 times. Every time I go through it, I learn just a little bit more. That's not very efficient. I don't feel very good about myself. I could outsource that same thing by listening to the text read out loud to me. I can take my phone, take a picture of the page, and using an app, convert it into an MP3 file that I can listen to. All of a sudden, I'm using this very strong auditory processor. I'm now comprehending like 80% of everything I listen to. That, my friends, is efficiencies. So this is what I learned. I learned that I needed to increase my self-efficacy. I needed to become resilient. The only way you can do that is to learn the skills of self-advocating for yourself and self-efficiency. If you can do these things, you'll become like little ninjas, man. You'll be able to go into this world, you can see bad stuff coming at you, and you can advocate for yourself. And when it all goes very wrong, you'll be resilient. You'll be able to learn from that mistake, stand yourself back up, and succeed. Honestly, do not let the things that disable you stop you. Let them enable you to go off and be amazing. That is everything.